Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel where we take a look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, things that you probably don't know about, but if you did, they would help you with your quest for better mental, spiritual, and physical health, your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview. And today's our 66th video that we've done on Daniel Ingram's book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. This is not an attempt to promote Buddhism per se, but really promote the techniques that are being used that have stood the test of time and that allow us to awaken ourselves and by degrees, and to use them in our in our own faith or lack thereof. And I see these techniques as being really just a technology or a method, a science of awakening. And Ingram talks about them as if they are hardwired to human consciousness, so-called, and that every human can benefit from these. Their mileage may vary, but there are a lot of commonalities, and these are reproducible experiments in meditation. Ingram talks about two different kinds of meditation: concentration meditation on an object, which takes you into various states or jhanas that will wow you and maybe bliss you out, but probably won't confer any type of ultimate wisdom. But then there are insight practices, which he says will confer ultimate wisdom. And these are all about opening up to our six sense doors, our five senses, and our mental impressions, and investigating all of those sensations for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. And by doing so, we gradually move through the various stages of insight and gradually wake ourselves up to many of the levels of suffering and ignorance that we, I guess, kind of inherited from the human culture. Now, in this chapter, Ingram is talking about different models of awakening, and he is, I think, going through the Bhumi model, the Bodhisattva Bhumi model, and this is pretty, even for me, pretty arcane and just obscure or obscurant, and there's only one more page of it, and then he'll be getting into a different model. But there are different ancient models of what is awakening as you move around the stages of insight. You go through one cycle and you become more awake, and then you go through another cycle. And what are the telltale signs? How can you tell where you're at in these different maps? And so we are going to be reading from here and for the next couple minutes, and then we'll get into talking about a different model from the jump, from the start. Okay, the biggest problem with this model is that it delineates the exact number of emanations that we should be able to manifest as bodhisattvas at each bhumi. And as the bhumis progress, the numbers quickly get so large as to be absurd. Why some realized poet included in the model this ideal of very specific numbers of manifested Pali locations, I have no idea, except perhaps to challenge our limited idea of what might be possible for a mind guided by realization of shunyata, what has been problematically translated as emptiness. While so many Tibetan practitioners since then have read this poetry literally, I also have no idea. Somehow, no Tibetan teacher that I am aware of has since called into question the practical applicability of literal interpretations of that presentation. Perhaps this model works well in Tibetan culture to inspire unique levels of effort, but I am not convinced, and I do know that it doesn't always translate well to the West, which can be a bit concrete and literal-minded. Because of it, you will hear Tibetan teachers occasionally say things like, I don't know any living person who has reached beyond the first bhumi as traditionally described, even though there are 10 of them in most translations or traditions, which is acknowledging this odd problem of manifold manifestation, as well as the other truly fantastic criteria. Aside from these problems, the texts that describe the bhumis make for very interesting reading if you can ignore the strangeness and appreciate the poetry, particularly in the middle stages of enlightenment. Our postmodern assumptions and paradigms, as well as some discomfort with myth, magic, metaphor, and how these might overlap with reality, likely impairs our ability to obtain nourishment from the nectar-filled petals of the bhumi models. That said, is the Tibetan tradition so weak and fragile that it can't go back and explain how its ancient, myth-heavy, poetic models have relevance to modern practitioners in straightforward terms? I truly look forward to that work being done, and I hope, as you likely do, that I am not the person to do it. In other words, game on. Okay, now we're going to review the Mahayana 5-path model. While I am discussing the Indian Buddhist models, I will present the 5-path model. The details of this model can be found in various places, such as Khenpo Kartha Rinpoche's book, Dharma Paths. As that book does such a fine job of explaining the model and is not expensive, I will give only a brief treatment of it here. There are other good resources, such as Alexander Berzin's extensive website, www.studybuddhism.com, that explain more of this model. It splits up various grades of arahants, as well as those of the lower paths, covers topics related to bodhisattva aspiration, and details the differences among some of the different historical tenet schools. My relatively simple caveman take on all of this is to practice well, aspire to help beings awaken, attain deep realizations, and see what remains to be done from there. First path in this model covers the territory from just beginning through the arising and passing away, and is called the path of accumulation. In the territory of first path, one accumulates direct insight into the true nature of sensations by direct investigation of impermanence and the selfless nature of phenomena, as one does in the first 4 jnanas. Second path, that of unification, encompasses the territory from the arising and passing away through the dark night to high equanimity and the first taste of stream entry. These are perfect correlations and thus have already been described. Third path is the path of seeing and encompasses stream entry and or the first bhumi, depending on how you believe those align. Fourth path, that of meditation, encompasses the rest of the bhumis within the sutra system. Note that the bhumis are counted differently within the Vajrayana tantric vehicle. Third path is described as a plane taking off, and fourth path as that plane flying higher and higher. Fifth path is that of Buddhahood. This map is a pretty good one as they go, and particularly if you can relate to the bhumi models that arise in what they call fourth path skillfully. Okay, this is called the Vajrayana models. Some of the Indo-Tibetan Vajrayana models add a lot of nuance to discussions of the emotional models and to working with the emotional aspects of our lives and of our practice in general. These are models that say there are lots of emotional energies that occur and that they can be perceived and manifest in either the light of wisdom, perceiving their empty and compassionate aspects, or the confusion of dualistic ignorance. This paradigm is a very dangerous one to work with, as its glaring and oft-demonstrated shadow side is a lack of skillful restraint in the face of these emotions. But if the model is used properly, it can really help cultivate a healthier, broader, and more accepting understanding of the world of feelings in general. Remember training in morality? It's one of the 3 trainings that he discusses, along with concentration meditation and insight meditation, is the training in morality. I hope so, since if you are going to use this model, which I do advocate using in the right place and at the right time, you really need to keep up that side of formal practice, or you are asking for serious trouble. The Bodhisattva and Vajrayana ethics are beyond the scope of this book, but the point remains that strong ethics are critical if you are going to follow this sort of path. As with the 5-path model, I recommend Alexander Berzin's outstanding multilingual website, www.studybuddhism.com, for reliable information on this conceptual material. The basic benefit of this paradigm is that it says essentially, here is reality in all of its human richness, intimacy, vibrancy, intricacy, and range. If you perceive things clearly and understand and accept this, you can begin to transform this wide range of emotions and experiences into something that is wise, bright, active, powerful, engaged, healing, full spectrum, and awakened. Thus, it takes a totally different approach from the models that advocate the elimination of emotions, their suppression or repression, and shutting out vast swaths of our hearts and realities. Please indulge my telling a brief part of the story of my path regarding how I came to appreciate the Vajrayana approach to the emotional models and its practical uses. I tell this part of my story to make some points that I failed to make in the first edition of this book. This story explains a lot of points you find in this book, so it is perhaps worth knowing the rest of the background story if in extremely abbreviated form. I started out in a very straight, by-the-book Theravada context. I went on retreats, got stream entry, and came home from India. Stream entry delivered as advertised. The techniques and models had worked well. I had the expected abilities and insights. All was well on that front. I practiced more. I attained second path. It was different, richer, more fractal, more complex, and there was a definite transformation of some things related to emotions, what triggered them, how long they lasted, and how they were perceived. I could clearly feel that they went down totally different, unfamiliar, and clearly superior brain pathways a substantial proportion of the time. I was impressed. The model seemed to hold up. I plunged on. I attained third path, or at least I attained something. Suddenly, everything was different, very different. The shift in my walking around way of perceiving things was huge and unexpected. Suddenly, nearly everything was luminous. Nearly everything seemed to contain its own light, its own awareness, as something intrinsic to the sensations themselves. And this caused a massive delocalization of the sense of watcher, doer, controller, and a totally different appreciation of what the path was about. Now, practice was much more about the field of experience, or I would say the field of experience, about this luminosity, about richness of phenomena, about trying to figure out how to get the last little subtle patterns that weren't perceived in this way to be perceived this way, naturally and at baseline. Let me pause here before I finish my story. I need to set up some more terms, concepts, and models I haven't really talked about yet. Okay, now we go to a section that's called the concentration models. I guess this is just kind of a detour to set up his own example here. The concentration models describe the general category of models that deals with how the shamatha jhanas and the stages of awakening align. At the far end of those, which I consider to be some of the worst of these models, some models and modelers assert that awakening involves attaining some of the higher jhanas, particularly the fourth through the eighth, and that the ability to attain these is awakening itself. I know a few meditators and a teacher or two who subscribe to these models. As these are transient states, this is not the sort of awakening that I consider worthwhile, though I do consider these states worthwhile for what they are and can do. The Buddha had a similar opinion, as he trained in these states and found them profound but unsatisfying, as they occur only in special circumstances and do not provide the deeper transformation, true liberation he was looking for. Only slightly better are the models that equate the various stages of awakening with the jhanas themselves, so that each of the various stages involves something like a permanent jhanic state. It is not that there aren't some very interesting parallels between the paths and the jhanas that fractal heads such as myself can't help but notice. But that is not the same thing as the paths being permanent jhanic states, which they are not. No mind state is permanent. There are some models of the stages of awakening which include criteria that people who are of a certain path can attain certain jhanas accessible to them only if they also have the requisite concentration skills. Specifically, there are 5 states corresponding to what is called the pure abodes, which are some of the classically described realms in the more general category of the fine material realms. The old texts describe the fine material realms as realms of existence associated with various degrees of jhanic bliss. The specific 5 pure abodes in question are the abodes of the peerless devas, or divinities, the clear-sighted devas, or the beautiful devas, or perhaps it's divas, D-E-V-A-S, the untroubled devas, and the devils not falling away, which are part of the standard 31 realms of existence you can find mentioned in the book, The 31 Planes of Existence by Venerable Bhante Savano, transcribed by Jinavamsa, sorry. After all that, I probably still pronounce it wrong, but as well as online at www.accesstoinsight.org. A great website, by the way, that correspond to special jhanas that only anagamis and arahats can attain. These are traditional canonical models and hold up moderately well to reality testing. Thus, the model implies not only that people who have attained those levels of realization with solid concentration skills might be able to attain those abodes, but also that those who can attain them must be at least anagamis, if not arahants, according to the traditional four-path model. Thus, some who can attain these jhanas sometimes use the standard bit of Theravada theory as part of their justification for whatever label they use for their level of insight. I've had fun tinkering with the jhanas that I think correspond to these realms. Descriptions of these vary by practitioner, but here are my descriptions of two of them that I spontaneously ended up in past the 8th jhana, being another interesting option beyond that post-8th junction point already mentioned. For the first one, take the bliss of the 2nd jhana, the breadth of the 4th jhana, the sense of pervading presence of the 6th jhana, and then add a massive dose of gratitude, as if this is the gratitude jhana, as though something has gone so perfectly right, and you can deeply and fearlessly feel appreciative of it. For the second one, extend the state out in a much more diffuse way, such that there is the more diffuse, cool bliss of the 3rd jhana. Add in something of the 4th jhana in terms of the evenness and breadth, and then add a massive dose of contentment and relaxation, like the most relaxed you would be during the best massage in the most perfect spa after the most satisfying day of your life. My experiments past those first two yielded contradictory results, but those first two should give you a sense of what this general territory can be like. These are remarkably healing, complete, pervasive, satisfying, and heartfelt states, and the descriptive pure applies quite nicely. Early on, I barely noticed them and would jump as fast as I could from the 8th jhana to fruition and the cessation of perception and feeling described in just a bit. Now I know better and sometimes take the time to enjoy them. They write ease, beauty, clarity, well-being, and contentment onto the mind. While I am discussing unusual states, I should point out that there are actually quite a few of them out there, further highlighting how the old texts simply don't give us enough terms and concepts to categorize the wild and kaleidoscopic world of meditative experiences. Here's another one of the more interesting ones. It's also somewhere in that territory that seems basically like pure presence, like being a super pervading watcher with the quality of its perception dominant, self-perception dominant. This has a very different quality from the 6th jhana, boundless consciousness, and in my opinion is far superior, and at points I have been so impressed by it that I have been tempted to consider it one of the highest of the temporary states that involve experience. I can see why people who chance into these might be compelled to ascribe them to some ultimate status or ground of being, self, as well as to use them as visions of a final endpoint of the path. But being conditioned and being specific states, they end. So beware of yet another of the dangerous golden chains that would tempt you to stop there and fail to progress further. Be careful to realize that jhanas are moldable by intention and vision, meaning that people can learn how to sculpt, craft, and engineer jhanas to fit their specifications, either by combining certain elements of various jhanas to make a fusion jhana, or by dreaming up new things to amplify into a pervasive state just by the power of strong concentration. Two of many weird examples from my own experiments are what I call the lidocaine jhana and the crushy love jhana. I'm not saying that these are necessarily a good idea, just mentioning them to give examples of what is possible with a concentrated mind. For the first one, I woke up from a nap before work and was lying on my arm. It had fallen asleep. I took that feeling of numbness and extended it out just like you would take any other sensation that you wanted to cultivate into a jhana and spread it to fill my entire body from head to toe with that odd numb sensation. It was about equal parts creepy and restful, but the fact that it could be done was most intriguing. In the second, this feeling of the best, most intoxicating part of crushy love, like you might feel in junior high school, just showed up for no obvious reason without any specific person that it was taking as the object of this feeling. I took it and expanded it out to fill my whole body. It clearly had some second jhana elements to it, but it also had its own distinct qualities in terms of emotional feel. It is so helpful to notice that feelings we usually associate with specific people can be just states that we simply create out of nothing, but the states themselves. Similarly, a vast range of states can be achieved by just inclining to any feeling we have ever felt, and if we practice well, we can learn to combine them in unusual and amazing ways to suit our various tastes. This is obviously both a possible skillful exploration of the power of intention and attention, as well as possibly a trap for those who are more on the jhana junkie end of the spectrum of personality types. The territory out there in here seems to be limited only by our imagination and concentration ability. I have imagined staging a friendly contest among high-level practitioners to dream up states that are even better than the ones I know, so that we can play with attaining them and seeing if there are any limits to the thing. The list of all the exotic celestial or deva realms found in the old texts lends credence to the view that there might not be a limit. I realize this may seem like a contradiction to earlier statements I have made about being able to master concentration practices absolutely. It is. Actually, the only axis you can master absolutely is the one people think is the least attainable, that of naturally perceiving all phenomena as they are. The take-home is that, as models of enlightenment go, the jhanic criteria, while lots of fun in terms of inspiring cool avenues of exploration, are not that reliable. People at lower levels of fundamental awakening who have powerful concentration abilities and who understand that this territory is malleable can get themselves into states that seem essentially the same as those that people of a certain level of realization are supposed to be able to attain. Unfortunately, there is no obvious, foolproof, objective way to sort out exactly what they have done. Thus, beware of using the concentration models as your primary criteria for assessing awakening, though certainly be informed by all the nifty options that may await you when you gain certain levels of insight. In that same vein, we get to one of the best options of them all. And this section is called the cessation of perception and feeling, in Pali, Naroda Samapatti. Then there is an attainment called the cessation of perception and feeling, henceforth called NS, or simply Nirodha in my general way of speaking. That is hard to classify. The word nirodha, meaning cessation, is also sometimes used without the qualifier samapatti to refer to fruition. So be careful to keep your terms straight when reading the old texts or speaking with others about these subjects. I always mean the cessation of perception and feeling. I want to say that clearly. Cessation, C-E-S-S-A-T-I-O-N, the end of, as opposed to sensation. The cessation of perception and feeling when I use the word nirodha, but others often do not and may mean fruition. This is the highest of the temporary attainments. It is discussed in multiple places, including Sutra 44, the shorter series of question and answers from the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, in a talk given by a female arhat named Dhammadina, and Path to Deliverance by Nayana Taloka, which draws from that fine text. You can also find it in commentaries such as the Visuddhimagga, as well as in the last few pages of Visuddhimagga. Can't remember what the difference there is. Anyway, by the commentarial criteria, at least, it can be attained only by anagamis and arhats who also have mastery of the formless jhanas. This attainment cannot be said to be either a state or a state, either a state or not a state, nor can it be said to be strictly a concentration or an insight attainment, as it is attained by a fusion of both shamatha and vipassana, and since it lacks a sensate basis for analysis, meaning there is no experience at all that can be analyzed, as perception and feeling have stopped. Okay, we're going to stop there for today, and tomorrow we're going to learn more about this NS state, Nirodha Samapatti, cessation of perception and feeling. So come back tomorrow and we'll check it out. Thanks for tuning in today and have a great day.